There is no such thing as empty time. There is only the experience of time, which varies from person to person. Episode 5 Carpe Diem. Hello everyone, and thank you for listening. Today I would like to talk about the famous maxim Carpe Diem. This Latin expression comes from a poem of Horace, who lived 2000 years ago in Rome during the time when Augustus founded the Roman Empire. Even though it was a time of expansion and conquest, life in Rome was peaceful, and Horace was considered the greatest poet of all time. We could translate Carpe Diem by harvest the day, and when Horace wrote that, it was a time of prosperity. We don't live in a time of prosperity anymore, and when someone tells you to enjoy the present, it sounds like there's some despair behind those words, that the future is doomed and that we should grab everything we can from today, even if it causes us problem tomorrow. It's like we were invited to ignore any kind of caution and reason and to just do all the things we never dared to do before. Of course, it's a misinterpretation. Horace was an Epicurean, so moderation was at the core of his philosophy. What he wanted was a simple life. He was looking for what the Greeks called ataraxia, the absence of troubles. Carpe Diem is not a call for an excessive form of hedonism. It's not about doing whatever you want, it's about wanting less and being satisfied with it. I think the main reason why it's so often misinterpreted is that we believe that enjoying the present is an easy task when it's actually not. What is easy is taking and abusing, destroying instead of loving, conflict instead of peace. But when you harvest a flower in a field, you don't uproot the old plant. You make sure that a new flower can bloom again, and you cherish the one that you just picked. This idea of cherishing the present can only work if you make sure that there will also be a present to cherish tomorrow. So Carpe Diem definitely has a notion of preservation. It also contains the idea that you shouldn't want to fix everything, because you cannot enjoy something half broken if the only thing you can focus on is the part that is damaged. If you see an old dog half blind and half deaf, you can pity him and walk away, or you can interact with him and realize he's still playful and very happy to live. Carpe Diem is not about wanting to see the whole world or doing all the things we wished we had done. It's about taking a step back, understanding that our inclinations can play against us, and that they can make us miss the things we have in front of us. It's also common to say that enjoying the present is about living every day like it was your last. But what would you actually do if it was your last day? Would you regret your past or cry about the absence of future? Would you do something unusual, or would you choose instead to live your last day like every other one and just try to enjoy it a little more? Carpe Diem is indeed about living every day like it was your last, but it's not in a destructive way. It's realizing that what you have right now is enough, that the past is the past, and there's no should have or could have. If there's still a few things to enjoy in the present, why would you relive the past over and over again? And I'm not being fatalistic here. Carpe Diem actually helps to avoid being anxious, because it takes too much of ourselves to want everything to be perfect in the future, and it takes too much energy to want to fix our past mistakes. And when you see life as it is instead of how you want it to be, you understand that anticipation and regrets always play against you. There's no possible harmony when you don't live in the present, otherwise you would always have to change everything to make peace. When we walk alone in a woodland at night, we are scared and we are cold. But I can assure you that we all have inside us a switch that enables us to face the fear, to face the cold, and to enjoy the night as it is. You feel powerful when you're not scared anymore. And this power is only achieved by your ability to change your perception of your environment. It's only when you are fine with the present that you become serene. Carpe Diem is a strong message, but it can be seen as a way to refuse responsibility and deny both the past and the future. We all have jobs and responsibilities we cannot run away from. So what does it mean to enjoy the present when you have people relying on you and tasks that need to be done and planned for? Carpe Diem comes from a poem that has been partly dedicated to Augustus, And many verses can be seen as life advice or general guideline for normal people, but also for the rulers. So it's obvious that when Horace wrote this poem, he didn't want for us to throw away everything we have to just do whatever we want. Again, the message is not destructive. It's an invitation to find within yourself a remedy to all the anxiety that your activities generate. If you cannot run away from the things that make you anxious, then change your perception of them, and try to harvest the flowers that still grow amongst the weeds. Horace's vision of the past was not naive. He was very much aware of its influence. Living in the present doesn't mean we should forget history and keep making the same mistakes. It's not the past of mankind that should be forgotten. It's your past, as a person, when your emotional burden is too heavy to carry. The good things you enjoyed in the past were good because it was the present at the time you enjoyed it. If, for instance, you had good times with your ex-partner, just forget it, because it's the only healthy way to move on. It might sound obvious to say, but the present you experienced in the past was made of a specific set of circumstances that cannot be reproduced. The past has many effects on us, it changes us, but we have no control over that, and what is done is done. It's not by invoking our past emotions that we win an argument, it's by explaining what we feel right now in the present. Besides, the past is always changing because we look at it with ideas and opinions that are based on the present. We evolve. Nostalgia is a good example of how we can fantasize about the past. Plenty of people think that some things were better in their memories, but when they look at the facts, they realize it's not true. The only space and time where we can be stable is here and now, because in the present, there's no misinterpretation like there is about the past, and there's also no misleading expectations like there is about the future. And talking about the future, it's important to know that Carpe Diem is actually extracted from a full line, and that line also says that we should put little trust in the future. You could see that as an anarchist motto, or a phrase that would advocate selfishness and chaos, but what Horace is pointing here is the fragility of our judgment. On one hand, human motives can be irrational and deceitful, and on the other hand, our judgment of them is unreliable. We are all a product of our time, and this period of time is rather short compared to the history of mankind, and all the events we are currently going through are by definition unfinished. So we shouldn't put too much trust in the future, because firstly we cannot judge those events, and secondly we are not that good at predicting the future. There is an interesting episode in Tolstoy's War and Peace that is worth mentioning. It's the true story of this officer who refused to follow orders and preferred doing nothing instead. He chose to not obey any principle or any pre-made rule, and he made a decision based only on his present situation. And eventually we learned that he was right to do so, because any movement of his army would have triggered a series of unfortunate events. This episode shows how unpredictable our decisions can be, and how sometimes it's just better to mindfully choose to do nothing. Good intentions can lead to bad consequences, and what is bad today can become good tomorrow. In other words, we cannot always control the impact of our actions. It's also interesting to note that this officer was actually very much liked by his men, because he would take care of them instead of projecting them into an uncertain future. People who do good around them are not generally the most anxious ones. They live in the present, and projecting ourselves into the future is indeed a cause of anxiety. We spend a lot of energy making plans instead of working on our ability to improvise. The more we think about the future, the more expectations we create, and when we have high expectations, we can obviously have big disappointments. To live only in the future makes us blind. When we design a plan, it can obviously fail, but most importantly, it forces us to go through only one path, which makes us ignore all others. It happened to me a few times when traveling. I had a perfect plan and a very detailed map showing all the places I was going to be on specific dates. I'm sure many of you already had the same experience. We project ourselves into the future, but then what happens is that we meet new people, we go left instead of right, or we get lost. and then everything changes, and often for the best. Sometimes we just trust in the future because it feels safe to have everything sorted out, when we think that nothing bad can happen. And I'm not saying that you should stop doing that to imagine the worst instead, because again, it would be a projection in the future. I'm saying that if you stay in the present instead of relying on an imaginary future, you'll be able to enjoy the simple things that will actually help you if something bad happens. That's the core message of mindfulness. It's about being aware of the beauty that is around us, but that we don't notice anymore. Mindfulness prepares us for the unexpected, but the bad things do not always come from the outside. They usually come from within ourselves because we want things that we don't need. If you're able to return to your roots when your inner demons show up, if you can concentrate on your inner causes, then it will be easier to repel those demons. Carpe Diem is about calm, humility, and moderation, because when you're always craving for emotions and feelings, you become unstable, and it's when you're emotionally unstable that those demons show up. In the present, there's not so much emotion. To be mindful is to feel complete. How many of us still take the time to enjoy the sky? How many of us still have the time to contemplate a simple landscape? Our lives are so busy that we never slow down. We run towards the future, being chased by the past and seeking the things we don't need. But when we let the storm pass, we realize how little we are and how little we know. Then with a bit of work, we can also realize that the knowledge we have is enough, and our ignorance of the things that are above us has actually no real effect on our daily lives.